Hello, I'm Li Hao. In the last video, we talked about module bundlers and I tried to explain it in 3 levels. So I believe you kind of understand what is module bundlers now, right? If you haven't watched that video, links will be in one of the corners and in the description. In this video and the following videos, what I'm going to do is actually go through each of the examples of module bundlers, right? So in this video, we're going to talk about Webpack, and in the coming ones, we'll be talking about Rollup, Vite, Snowpack. Hopefully it gives you a bit of sense of how it's like using these tools, things that you need to know about them, interesting facts, for example. Right, so without further ado, let's take a look. So here, if you search for Webpack, the first result is the Webpack official website, right? Or we can go to look at Wikipedia. So fun fact about Webpack is that it's created by Tobias Koppers. His username is Sokra, W Sokra. Here is his Twitter account, and you probably can find that all over the place in Webpack source code. So Webpack is created in 2014, which is at the point of this recording, which is 2021, it's almost 7 years. Right? So 7 years ago, this the background or the landscape of front end is so much different from what we are now, right? Things move so fast in the front end world. So you need to give a bit of respect and also understanding of what Webpack has been through, right? So and for that, I found an interesting article, or rather a blog by Webpack. Right, so here in one of the references, this probably is the oldest that we can find. What is Webpack? And if you go in and take a look, this is, if you look at the revision, it's first written in 2014. This is the Webpack 1 documentation. Mindful that right now, 2021, we are at Webpack 5. So that is very far long ago, right? This is like the origin story of Webpack. So same thing, apparently this logo has been here since the beginning of time. And why another module bundler? Right, so existing module bundlers are not suited for big projects. Okay, most pressing reason is code splitting. Well, so I wasn't there around back then, but I believe Webpack might be one of the pioneers that experiment with this idea called code splitting, right? Which the author tried to extend from the existing module bundlers but wasn't able to achieve its goals. So interesting, you must pay homage to Webpack for code splitting. So what and how is Webpack different, right? The first thing is code splitting, as you can see, and loaders. Okay, so that is one of the interesting things that was happening to Webpack. Clever parsing. I need to give you to that. So if you are trying to import things like expression, right? You can do this with, I believe this was written way earlier, but now you can do it with dynamic imports. And if you put expressions over here, Webpack can still handle them and try to bundle them, right? So basically it can process nearly every third-party library according to Webpack, because no matter how you write it, it still works. And it handles most common module styles, CommonJS and AMD. Of course, right now, these are what we are going to call like legacy module styles, right? With the introduction of ES modules in 2015, now the de facto way of doing things should be ES modules. But of course, I believe Webpack still maintains the backward compatibility, still supports these CommonJS and AMD, but that has also weighed down like Webpack itself by introducing more complexity into the tool itself. And plugin system, right? Webpack is famous for its plugin system, right? So everything is done under plugin system. I'm going to show you later on. So I bring you all through this like kind of down the memory lane of the origin story of Webpack. It's such that we are cognizant about the backdrop of things happening around when Webpack was created. Of course, all of this we have been taken granted right now because almost all module bundlers supports almost everything that was written over here, and there's nothing special about Webpack now. But we again, we need to be respectful of Webpack for being like one of the pioneers paving a way forward. So let's take a look at how we're going to use Webpack. So here I have my projects over here. Let me create maybe a folder called test Webpack. And let me initialize the project. Okay, so there's two things that you need to install when you want to use Webpack. So I'm going to install them. First is the Webpack and Webpack CLI. While installing, let me tell you like what's the difference between these two, right? So Webpack itself is the module bundler, and Webpack CLI is the tool that provides a command line interface for you to interact with Webpack. Once you set this up, we can create some modules, import, and import B, and I'm going to console log A plus B. Right, so I'm going to create a few files, a.js, or default A, same thing with B. Right, so I have all my modules now. So the next thing I need to do is to use Webpack to bundle them. So to do that, I will say npx webpack. So there's two things involved. First is npx. So npx is a command from Node or npm that allows you to run the Webpack command, right? And Webpack command could be either from the Webpack that you installed locally in this folder, or if it's not installed, it will try to download Webpack on demand from the npm registry and then runs it. Right? So it's a clever tool that allows you to run Webpack command with or without installed Webpack. Right? And the second thing is when you say run the Webpack command, which means it's running the Webpack CLI. So that's why you need to install the Webpack CLI so that you can run Webpack. So the first command that we learn about Webpack is to run like Webpack itself, and that will build the project. Right, so by default, Webpack, if you don't specify any configuration, Webpack will look at the source index.js module, and then you will bundle it into this /main.js. Okay. So if you want to add configuration, the next thing you need to do is to create this file called webpack.config.js. Okay, so this again is like the default name of Webpack config. So over here, if I try to change the output folder to be output, then if I try to run build, then I will find my Webpack output at the output folder, right? You create a new folder called output. So this is the default name, webpack.config.js in the root folder where you run Webpack command. If you're trying to change this name, say maybe webpack1.config, then probably what you need to do is when you run Webpack, you need to run with --config webpack1.config. Right? So this will tell Webpack that hey, use this file, config file name. So we know about what is the difference between Webpack and Webpack CLI. So what about if you want to use Webpack in some of your build tools, or maybe you're creating another command tool that will use Webpack under the hood, right? So how would you do that? Well, you can come over here. Let me create a file. And over here, you can import Webpack directly. So in this case, you don't need Webpack CLI. You need Webpack because Webpack is the module bundle itself. And then you use Webpack to create an instance of the compiler. So we probably will talk about that much later on, like what is a compiler. But basically, you call Webpack with the options. So I'm going to copy my option over here. In any chance, you could also read this options itself by requiring the Webpack file, right? So maybe let me just do that. So I'm reading this, taking it in as, and then next is that you need to call run. And this will take in a callback where you will be notified when your build is finished, build successfully, right? So here it is Webpack. So if you're not using Webpack CLI, then this is how you probably would use Webpack on other scripts that you run to build using Webpack. Of course, I glazed through a lot of details over here where what are all the commands that's available. That you probably should go to the Webpack official documentation and find it, right? So if you go to the API, and if you look at the node interface is where you should be looking for. And here it tells you how you can use the Webpack Node API. So now we've talked about the differences between the Webpack, the Webpack CLI, and how you can use Webpack Node API to call Webpack itself. Right. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the build mode and the development mode. In build mode, usually what you do is you bundle a code for preparing for production, right? You build for production. And for development mode, usually you're done while you're developing your code. And usually in that case, you will use what is called the watch mode, meaning you let Webpack to continuously bundle a new bundle for you while you are changing the code, right? So for example, if you add a new file, then that new module should be included into the bundle, and it does that on the fly where you are making changes. So for that purpose, we can use the flag called watch. So let's see, I'm gonna call Webpack and then I'll pass in watch. Then I'll be entering a watch mode, right? So here, whenever I change something, say for example, I create a new module, c.js export default c. And I'm going to import this, import C. Then as soon as I save this, you see that it builds another time. And if you look at the output, you can see that now I have ABC. So this watch mode allows continuously watching changes that you made and bundles it for you. Right? So there's a similar thing in a Webpack Node API, where I believe it's called watch, where I believe it will set up the watch mode to watch the file changes at the same time that this callback will be called every time when their build is when a new build is created, right? So that you know, maybe it's it will over here, maybe you can trigger a refresh on your browser, or maybe send you a notification or something. So the next thing I want to talk about is the webpack-dev-server. So it's a package that you need to install, yarn at webpack-dev-server. And what webpack-dev-server does is basically sets up a server on your machine that will serve all the files that is being built by Webpack. So say for example, I run npx webpack-dev-server and then pass in the config webpack-1.config.js. By default, it sets up the watch mode, and you don't have to worry about watching the changes, because that's Webpack-dev. When you run with Webpack-dev-server, it will tell the Webpack to start a watch mode. Right. So here we see it's finished running, and next thing we can do is to visit our local host. Right. So let's see what you can do with it. So over here, if you look at here, we built our output main.js, and I believe this is what you can do. Oh, sorry, I think it's main.js. So visiting this will be the code that is being bundled by Webpack. You see a lot of code over here. But if you try to search for the thing that we wrote, console log ABC, it's still here, right? Except that there's a few things being added by the Webpack-dev-server into a bundle when you try to serve them, right? And these codes, what they do is that they set up a connection between the browser and the Webpack-dev-server. So as I told you that every time when you watch a file, when there's a change, you get a callback, right? And Webpack-dev-server will use this connection to tell the browser that, hey, something has changed, and you should reload or hot module replacement to update the bundle, right? So using Webpack-dev-server, when you're developing, this code, if you're using main.js in some website, in your website, you'll notice that every time when you change something and you save it, the website will refresh or reload by itself. And you can configure a Webpack-dev-server in the options over here under the dev server options, right? There's a lot of things that I'm probably not going to go through today. So if you're interested, you can find in the configuration section of the docs. And over here under dev server, this is all the options that you can configure with the Webpack-dev-server. So since we are talking about the configurations, let's go through a bit like what are the things that you can configure with Webpack configuration. So in the last video, again, if you haven't watched that, links in the description. I strongly recommend you to watch the last video, which is about understanding module bundlers at a conceptual level. Right, so in the video we talk about this. So we probably glazed through a lot of details over here, right? The high level idea you need to know is we resolve dependency, transform the module, and bundle them. Yes, we talk about the module bundler main workflow is to resolve for dependency, and then for each modules we may do some transformation through concept of loader or transformer. In Webpack we call them loaders. And once you finish finding out all the dependency, then you move to the next step, which is to do the bundling. Right, so each of these steps, resolving for dependency, loading, transforming, and bundling, each of these steps has its own place in the configuration. Right, so over here, if you look at the documentation on the Webpack official docs, the first thing you need to look at is for resolving, everything is under resolve. Right, so here it tells you can configure how modules are being resolved. So say for example, the things that you can do is that you can add aliases to your modules. So you find that your module name is too long, or it's somewhere else, you can have an alias for them so that you just use that alias name instead of the real name. Yeah, and there's many more that can be configured over here. And we are done with resolving. Then the next part is loading or transforming. Right, so that part is under module. Okay, so if you go to module, what you can do over here, the main one is called rules. Rules are where you specify what are the rules that you can match on the modules and what to do with them. Right, it's like an if and else. Right, if you match this rule, you do this thing. And so the rules usually you specify by regular expressions or like functions that match with the name of the module, which is the file name itself. Right, so if your file name matches this, then do this. Right, and most of the case you match based on the file extension. Right, so if you're a CSS file, you end with a .css, you do this. If you are a SVG file, you end with a .svg, you do that. Right, and the things that we do is to do the transformation. Right, so that is under the use. Right, so every rule there will be after the rules of like what you can do, and then so mainly you have the let me find it. Okay, mainly you have the test to test for the rules, right? And then when the condition match, then you do the use, which is to do something. Use these functions, use this transformer or loaders. Okay, so in Webpack it's called loaders. So use these loaders to apply them onto my module. Right, so it can be again, it can be an array and can be an options, options with that you pass into these functions itself. Right, so that is where you look for. So loaders in related stuff, you look for modules under the modules category. Right, once we are done with that, the next thing we'll look at is the bundling. Right, so bundling, each module bundler has its own way of doing the bundling, which we covered in the last video. And for Webpack, if you want to configure them, things you usually configure are like some of the strategy of loading your modules, some of the optimization stuff. Right, so most of them is under optimization. Right, say for example, do you want to concatenate the modules together, or how do you like certain things that you can do with the modules that you want to include, like say these modules in its own file, or you want that maybe these two modules should come together in its own file, or how big the file should be. If the bundle file is too big, you want to split them into smaller files such that you can parallelly fetch them in the browser. Things like that are under optimization, right? So you see that there's still a lot of other things that is under the configurations. Namely, I forgot to mention is the input and output. Right, input is one of the files that you starts bundling with, which I say is your entry point of your application. Right, so that is under the entry. Entry is where you start your it's like you specify your entry point for Webpack to start looking, and then you will resolve to all the dependency. And then for output, it's under the section called output. So this is where you tell Webpack how to name your files, or where you output your files in a directory, or if after you build your file, you upload them to a CDN, content delivery network, or some servers, and if you want Webpack, whenever they find this file, to use a full URL like a www.blah-blah-blah.com/ your file name, then you can add that public path. Configuration of that will be part under the output section. So the rest of the configurations are things that you probably would know when to find them when you need it, right? Say for example, like caching, dev tools, some watch options, performance stuff, stats, experiments and stuff, right? We probably will go through some of them in the later video when we are talking about specific topics, right? So and then the last of, but not the least of all these configurations is plugins, and a lot of times you configure them a lot, right? In Webpack, plugins is like the soul of Webpack. Everything within Webpack is done through a plugin, and a lot of other things that could be done by Webpack is configured through plugins, right? So to prove my point about saying everything in Webpack is done through plugins, let me show you one file in the Webpack source code, and you probably will know what I'm trying to say. So if I come over here in the Webpack source code, if you come over to the lib folder and look for the WebpackOptionsApply, over here you'll see at the very top of this file, right? I'm zooming out, so I'm trying to zoom in a bit so that you can see clearly at specific lines. You see over here at the beginning of this file, you're importing a lot of plugins. Asset modules plugin, JavaScript modules plugin, JSON modules plugin, chunk refresh plugin, entry option plugin, record plugin, runtime plugin, API plugin, all plugins, right? 50 over lines of plugins. And then here is WebpackOptionsApply, which is this file. And what this file does is that actually it takes in the options object you configure, your webpack.config.js, and it takes in and you process it. The way of processing it is actually take through all these plugins and apply them, right? Passing these options to plugins, right? So everything in Webpack is done through plugins. And to understand certain parts of things, you can go to look at the plugin code and try to understand. Although I must admit it's not an easy feat, right? Because of this highly pluggable system, a lot of things that even within the plugin itself is not done by the plugin itself, right? It calls other plugins to do for them. So things are fragmented in a sort where there's a lot of things that's being delegated through different plugins to pull their weight together to achieve the final output. So reading through them without an overview of how things work may not be an easy feat, I would say, right? It took me years to dig through, and because I went in for a specific intention to look for something, then I managed to find certain things, but there's a lot of things that I still don't really know. So while we are here at GitHub, last thing I want to show you is that Webpack is an open source, so the source code is on GitHub, and under the Webpack organization, there's a few repositories. So the first one is Webpack, right? And then webpack-dev-server is in its own repository, and webpack.js.org is the repository for the Webpack official documentation site, and then Webpack CLI is the CLI tool that we say that runs and then call Webpack to do the bundling, right? So this is all the source code. If you're interested to read them, they're all in here. So that's all for this video. This video we talk about Webpack, and I know we kind of jump around everywhere, and that's because I want to do this like more of like an overview about things that you should know about Webpack, but but we are going to cover every bit in detail, like how resolving works and transforming and like exactly how bundling works, more deep dive in a later video. So hopefully you learned something today, right? And we're probably gonna do the same thing for rollup, Vite and Snowpack if I can. So that's all for this video. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you have any thoughts or comments, write them in the comment section. And be sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell so that you get notified when the next video is out. So see ya. Bye bye.